Hello friends, and welcome to my channel if you're new, or welcome back if you are back. If you are new, hi, my name's Rabbit and my pronouns are they, them, and either way, thank you so much for clicking on my video today. This is very impromptu. I'm a little unclear if I'm gonna like publish it solo or like tack it on to my other video, like with all my ruminations and thoughts. I had some breakthroughs, so I wanted to talk about stuff. Okay, I was reflecting on the comments that I had gotten on my cringe video, which again, thank you so much. That was like so sweet and it made me so happy, and you guys are just the best. And also just like on the type of educational goth content that I've been seeing online. And I was thinking about this pattern that I've been seeing both reflected online and just ones that I have personally felt as a member of the subculture. These fears of like not knowing enough to call yourself a proper member of the subculture, or to like tag a DIY project with #goth because someone might accuse you of not knowing enough. And I was reflecting on these, and a lot of these feelings, both in the comment sections and in conversations that I've had in real life, seem to come from femme people, young people, folks with all kinds of marginalized identities that have historically been excluded from both subcultures and mainstream culture. And that really got me thinking, not just about goth, but about patterns I've seen in my own life, in academia, and how these weird hierarchies show up in different spaces. I wanted to share some thoughts. Please let me know if this resonates, or if I sound like a curmudgeonly old killjoy, because I really am not trying to be like, these kids are doing it wrong, like type of person. That attitude I feel can be so damaging, and as I age, I really want to be able to like check my knee-jerk reaction to like, the kids just don't get it, and like pause and reflect, because sometimes that feeling might be rooted in something, but sometimes it's just personal projection. And on this topic, it's definitely stirring up some personal history for me, so I hope it's okay if I unpack it a little. First things first, everyone is allowed to be new, to be awkward, to still be learning, to still be figuring it out. And again, I might be off base. I genuinely believe that every human being who is drawn to the alternative community has some value to bring to it, and I think that people who are drawn to it for a reason. Some complex, deeply personal, individual, sometimes inarticulate reason. But it's valid. We all start somewhere, and everyone should have the freedom and comfort to explore the community. I am not attempting to dissuade people from the types of content they want to make or watch. I'm just reflecting on a pattern that I've been noticing in the scene, as well as just like, as long as I remember being part of the scene. Like, I don't think this is something new. I think that this was also a thing when I would read the WikiHow articles and the stuff like that as a young person growing up. What I've been thinking about is this need to prove ourselves worthy, especially among young folks and new folks to the subculture. There's this fear of being seen as like a poser, or not goth enough, or heaven forbid an e-girl. And I've been thinking about how that anxiety shows up in subcultural spaces. One of the ways that I'm going to talk about today that I see it manifest is through some folks making really polished, really academic sounding educational content about goth. You've probably seen it, the like history of the goth subculture type videos. Goth came from post-punk, and punk was a thing in the 70s, and these are the big goth bands, and like this is a chronological timeline, and it's like very kind of formulaic, I guess would be the word, and there's nothing wrong with that, but I feel like a lot of this very academic content tends to be coming from like either channels that kind of have nothing to do with the subculture, like the TED Ed type channels, or folks who seem like a little bit younger. And in contrast, a lot of the elder goths that make content that were there in the 80s, their videos are more about like their personal histories and their like personal opinions, instead of these more like standardized and like academically referenced subculture overview sort of videos. And I'm not saying that either of those types of content is bad. I think both of them have their place, and I think that it makes a lot of sense that the new stuff is like the very academic standardized stuff. Let me discuss. A lot of young people, marginalized people, femme people, newcomers, and or folks who just don't visually fit the classic goth stereotype in some way might feel anxious about being excluded. Especially online, there is this huge anxiety that a lot of people feel of being told that you are doing it wrong. You're disrespecting the subculture, and like some self-appointed gatekeeper is gonna be a dick to you. And one way to guard against that feeling of fear and that nagging insecurity that like, maybe I don't belong, maybe like I did miss some crucial piece of information that everyone else knows, is to try to prove that you do belong, that you do know all the information, by showing you've done your homework, citing the bands, the history, and being very, very correct. And it feels like there's this pattern online where a lot of folks only feel safe to share knowledge if it sounds official. Like, we're mimicking institutional structures, like academia, trying to make Goth feel credible by presenting it like a research paper. And that makes me wonder if we're unconsciously upholding the same hierarchical systems that might have just made us feel excluded in the first place. Western society really places a lot of value on this idea that objective truth is like out there and can exist just generally. It's something that can be known universally, and the method that we are taught to be able to get to that truth, the most legitimate method, isn't through spirituality, isn't through internal reflection or like what we know about ourselves. It is through science. Science is placed on a very high pedestal as the ultimate arbiter of truth and legitimacy. And this is why also we like culturally value things like science and math over arts. We have this notion that science is generally a more useful tool for explaining things. And while science itself isn't inherently good or bad, this is not an anti-science channel, it is just one singular way of knowing and understanding things. And I think it's worth pausing to reflect on why we're so drawn to applying specific frameworks to explain ourselves and our subcultures. Why did I start thinking about this? The thing that got me thinking about this was how similar some of the feelings that I have when watching those videos brought up a really similar feeling that I had when I took a class years and years ago that really stuck with me, and unfortunately it really stuck with me in a negative way. It was a course that was called like the politics of sexuality or something along those lines, and I thought it was going to be about like queer history and like this kind of stuff, but it was very science-based, and it ended up being the most alienating, uncomfortable experience I had ever had in school as a queer person. All of the studies and papers very much made it feel like they were dissecting pieces of queerness and trauma and identity and trying to like put them in little categories and define them. And all of it was done in a way that genuinely, like, reading about it made me, who related to the people who were being studied and stuff, just feel like not human. Like, the scientific gaze was truly not seeing an ounce about the individual it claimed to be caring about in its papers and its studies. And the scientific methodology was committed to sanding everyone down to like multiple choice questions and very generalized abstracts that could be like plotted in data points and on graphs. In a slightly idiotic move for my final paper on this subject, because of how alienating and horrible I felt during the entire class, I decided to try to like be a little rebel and like write a zine instead of like a proper final paper. Like, I included parts of the final paper but not quite, and I laid out all these really personal traumatic experiences with queerness and feelings and explained like how much being in this class alienated me and like how much I hated this scientific lens, and how like while I understood other people's need for specific definitions and data points, it didn't feel like a humanizing way to understand queerness to me. Like, being queer was something to define from the outside, not like something any human could live or experience. And I'm not bringing this up to say that that class was wrong, or that that's the only way to transmit knowledge. I think that that class was traumatic to me for like other reasons, it's fine. But that experience really stayed with me. And now I see something kind of eerily similar unfolding in spaces that should feel less alienating, like the Goth subculture. I truly might just be feeling iffy because it reminds me of this weird personal experience. But please let me expand. I've noticed this impulse showing up to define ourselves very like systemically and taxonomically, especially online. There's been this like wave of especially younger goths stepping up to educate others about the scene, and I really admire that impulse. Like, do not get me wrong. I think it is so beautiful to share knowledge and to want to and like to care about the history. But to me, a lot of these videos and posts end up leaning pretty hard into this really standardizing tone. Like, here are the bands that count, here is the correct timeline, here are the official subtypes of goth, diagrams, and like aesthetic flowcharts. To be fair, I've done little diagrams and flowcharts too. Like, I get they have their place, they can be useful, 100%. And I also feel this kind of relates to that impulse people feel when they correct you in the comments. Like when you say goth music colloquially instead of specifying like gothic rock or new wave or post-punk. Or like if you use the word Molgoth and they feel like they're being so educational, and when they're like, well, if you were a real fan of the subculture, you would know that Molgoth was really an insult. And you're like, okay, you can understand that we're like using these terms colloquially, right? And like language develops and things gain new meaning. And again, this isn't meant to be a critique of the people trying to share this type of knowledge. I totally understand the instinct. We're raised in a culture that tells us our knowledge only matters if it's clearly categorized, academically cited, and objective. Even knowledge about ourselves. And especially for younger folks trying to be taken seriously in alternative spaces, or to navigate accusations of being called a poser, or just feeling like one, there's a lot of pressure internally and externally to prove that you've done your homework and that you know the facts. Like, it makes sense. Western academic and colonial frameworks tend to prioritize objectivity, categorization, and standardization. They treat knowledge as something to be sorted and labeled and proven, and it's less legitimized if it's something felt or experienced or told through story. Academic frameworks often elevate one legitimate form of knowledge and devalue the other. And when those systems sneak into subcultures, I feel like they can flatten them. Storytelling, personal experience, intuition, and community memory are valid ways to share and gain info, but we tend to really delegitimize those as less valid. So I think it's valuable to ask, what are we trying to legitimize when we present knowledge in this way? Who are we hoping will take us seriously? On whose terms? What do we lose when we prioritize being correct over being personal, poetic, weird, or contradictory? Like, why is so much goth content online centered around proving your genre literacy or disproving other people's? Why does it matter to prove that you know which bands count, which clubs were the most historic, and what year Bela Lugosi's Dead came out? Like, why is there such a focus on what type of a goth you are, as if you can only pick one and any deviation ever makes you a poser? Why not, instead, if you are drawn to the scene, come join us. No need to pick a box or prove yourself. Come explore this vast and wonderful community. And you might be like, but Rabbit, the subculture has a history, and it's very important, and the kids need to be educated, and it's good that they're educating each other. And like, yeah, dude, 100%. That is not what I'm arguing about. It's rather that I'm noticing a pattern that the way this knowledge gets transmitted is so standardized, and I'm questioning if we're just upholding more systems of hierarchy when we only feel comfortable sharing information in this one specific and predetermined way. Another like kind of similar related thing that's like wild to me, not in like this is so bad, but like just like wild as in like this is very interesting to me, is how embodied knowledge can be elevated to formalized knowledge in a way to like legitimize it more. So what the fuck am I talking about? Weirdly, dance. I was thinking about dance and how it's like so personal and interesting, and I think everyone has like a very unique and specific relationship to it, like whether you're like an I never dance person or like I dance every day on TikTok. Like there's a vast spectrum. I am not putting a moral value on any of it. Whatever you do or don't want to do, cool. But I was just like reflecting on the concept of it and realizing that like I never really realized how social dancing is, because for me it's not that way at all. It's about like tuning in and like shutting out the world, and like I usually close my eyes if I can, like even at the club I just like try to find a corner and like, you know, it's like very intuitive and emotional and sensory, and it never like occurred to me to Google like a dance tutorial because like it's just about how it feels, right? But at the same time, I've seen people make tutorials like how to dance to goth music, and I genuinely think that's so cool. I'm not knocking those creators at all. I actually think they're sharing something really valuable and generous. It's fun, and I get that it can feel reassuring to have some reference point, especially if you're new to the scene and feel nervous about fitting in. There's absolutely nothing wrong with wanting to prepare or like do your research. As an anxious person, I get it. But what I'm saying is it's kind of fascinating to me how these tutorials end up formalizing something that is, at its core, a very embodied experience. You see moves get names, like pulling the taffy, and it becomes kind of a dance canon. And that canon kind of gives the dance legitimacy in a way that just seeing someone like doing their thing at the club, like, might not. And I think that mirrors something broader in how our culture treats knowledge. Even when something is rooted in the body or the senses, we often feel pressure to codify it, intellectualize it, make it teachable in order for it to be seen as, like, a legitimate thing. And that can come with some subtle consequences. Because what happens if you don't dance like that? What if your expression looks weird, or too much, or not goth enough? I am personally an extremely bouncy and flaily chaotic dancer, as is much of my personality. That translates to my dance style too. But I'd be lying if I said that having seen those like really gorgeous, like super fancy dance videos didn't make me feel like, oh shit, like is my version cringe, or like am I doing it wrong, or like is there a right way to dance goth? And like, no, like obviously just do whatever you want. If you want to dance exactly like the tutorials, cool. If you want to not dance at all, cool. If you want to dance like a flaily Muppet like me, cool, it's all good. So I'm just saying, like, even embodied knowledge sometimes gets formalized, and it doesn't need to be legitimate. I think it's a really interesting phenomena, but you don't need to know, like, the official goth dance moves to belong. Your way of moving, expressing, and feeling is valid, even if it doesn't look like anyone else's. So yeah, that was just like one of the things that I was thinking on the dance topic, and slightly related, social media, and like, one sec. My camera's dying, I need to plug you in. So on the whole, like, not feeling goth enough, or am I goth enough, or who's goth, or the history of goth research, like all this stuff. I don't know how much social media is to blame for the feeling of like subcultural anxiety, or how much it's actually helping to relieve it. Probably a bit of both. I'll read out what I wrote. Take my whole spiel about the goth dance tutorials, for example. In the past, if you wanted to learn how to dance goth, your options might have been pretty limited, and maybe kind of freeing because of that. You might practice dancing alone in your room, no audience, no pressure, or go to a club and just kind of feel it out. The fact that no one was gonna potentially record you and put you on TikTok and be like, look how cringe this person is, probably relieved a lot of anxiety that exists today. Maybe you'd observe other people at the club and kind of mimic it if you felt awkward, or maybe if you had a friend whose moves you really liked, maybe you could ask them for some pointers. Maybe you'd watch some MTV for like inspiration, or even like a magazine tutorial. I remember reading like some Aurelio Voltaire books that had like a little bit of goth dance moves. I think that's where my pulling the taffy example came from. So like this kind of thing has existed before, and I'm not pretending that it's totally new. But for me, what I'm saying is it never really occurred to me to think that there is a correct way to dance to goth music. I danced how I danced, for joy, for release, to feel something in my body. But now with TikTok and Reels and all these snappy like how to dance goth videos, often well-meaning and sometimes even silly on purpose, I've caught myself second-guessing, like, is my way wrong? And of course it's not. Dancing is about expression, not uniformity. But I think when everything is broken down into bite-sized how-tos and circulated over and over again, it can feel like these things are rules. Like if you're not doing it right, you'll look weird or like a poser or just out of place. Social media has this weird way of amplifying things until they seem bigger and more official than they actually might be. The same thing happens with music. Like, I fucking love the classic goth bands, but I'll be honest, Joy Division isn't super up my alley. They've got a few tracks that I enjoy, but like overall, eh. However, Cinema Strange, The Cure, Sisters of Mercy, that shit lights me up. And there's like a bunch of other bands I could go on about, but like, that makes me feel really good in my soul and makes me feel like me. Just because I don't happen to like Joy Division and someone else might really love Joy Division and that's their favorite goth band, doesn't make my love of Bauhaus like less legitimate. It's just about finding that stuff that makes you feel good and makes you feel like yourself. Like that's what subculture should be about. Not memorizing the full discography of every 80s band just to prove your worth, or stacking your jacket with the exact right patches to preempt any accusations of being a poser. Like, subcultures to me are best used as a map, not a checklist. A way of finding things that you might love, people you might connect with, ideas that might resonate. They should expand your sense of self, not shrink it. So yeah, I don't really know if the internet makes joining subcultures easier or harder. It probably depends on who you are, on how you use it, what kind of community you find, but I do think it's worth asking. Are we helping each other discover joy and connection, or are we accidentally building a maze of hoops to jump through just to feel like we belong? Because part of me really feels like when people are treated like imposters in a subculture, like no matter what they do, they'll always be seen as fake, always be seen as ignorant, or always be seen as like trying to kill the subculture, they might just end up thinking, well, The community is determined to see me as the problem no matter what, so why bother trying? And that sucks. Like, it pushes people away before they've even had a chance to connect, learn, or contribute. It creates fear instead of curiosity, and shame instead of joy. And the result? Some folks just quit before they start. Others give up trying entirely, not because they don't care, but because they've been told over and over and over that they'll just never be enough. Like, you know what I mean? Can we just, like, take people at their word when they say they like something? It makes no sense to have this thing of like, no. Looking at you, I don't see it. I don't think you could be a real fan. Like, just fuck off. That kind of gatekeeping doesn't protect a subculture. It just starves it. So I'm absolutely not saying don't make educational videos. I'm saying that's not the only way to learn. It's not the only way to teach. And if you're new to the scene, or if you're weird or experimental, or you're not sure where you fit in yet, you don't have to become Mr. Goth Professor to be taken seriously. You can learn from embodying it, going to the club, listening to the music, watching documentaries from the time, from the people, or like listening to people today talk about their current experience in the subculture, gaining inspiration from people's books and poems and stories, from your friends, from elder goths, whether you meet them online or in the club. You can share your own memories. You can make content that's messy and poetic and funny and contradictory. You can document what you see, what you feel. That's just as valid. Personally, I love videos where people share their old photos, talk about their local scenes, or tell personal goth stories. Maybe I'm just a little nosy Nancy, but I love that. I live for that. I'd take that over another Goth 101 history video any day. Personally, I really truly believe that subcultures are made up of people. They're living, breathing, evolving communities, and I care so much more about the individuals in them having a good time and feeling safe than protecting some imagined moral purity of the scene from these like imposters that are gonna come get us. Like, if someone is drawn to the community or has an interest in it, it's probably for a reason. Why would you want to shut down that desire for exploration just because it's different than yours? This really came up specifically for me because I saw this post on Tumblr. And it's not just one. It's not just about this post. I've seen so many posts from young punks and goths, or just people that are new to the scene, but especially the ones from literal teenagers, like, and they post that they're terrified to tag their DIYs or their outfits as like #punk or #goth because they're scared that someone will come for them. One kid said, I know the history, I'm learning, I know I'm new, but I love the music, I get why it matters, but I'm still scared to post because I don't want to get yelled at for doing punk wrong. And it, like, no, what the fuck? Because this is exactly what happens when we turn the love of a subculture into a performance of legitimacy. We can say it's about education, about honoring the roots, about doing the work and respecting the elders, and obviously context does matter. But when the dominant tone shifts from curiosity to compliance, from invitation to intimidation, I think something precious is lost. It starts to feel like there's only one correct way to show up. One set of bands, one aesthetic that must be perfectly visible and legible from a single post at all times. Like, we start seeing knowledge as a badge you must flash to gain entry, rather than something you'd want to share because it excites you or helps someone feel more connected. It kind of sometimes feels like there's this Wikipedia martyrdom like attitude where it's like, I did the hard work of memorizing the facts and now I must suffer through teaching them to you so you don't embarrass us all. To me, that doesn't feel like education. It feels more like fear disguised as authority. And it trickles down into the smallest things. People too nervous to make a band patch for a band that they love because they're scared someone will think it's not goth enough. People afraid their battle jacket won't pass some imaginary purity test. People carefully curating their playlists so they'll appear legitimate. And meanwhile, every jacket ends up looking identical and every playlist pulls from the same list of safe, pre-approved bands. Like, it's fine if everyone actually likes Susie and Bauhaus and whatever, but isn't it weird how it kind of all starts feeling required? How scared people are to be eclectic, messy, and personal with the things that they love? You shouldn't have to preface every creative thing you do with a disclaimer like, don't worry, I know the history, I've read the sacred texts, please do not smite me. That's not what punk was about. That's not what goth was about. These scenes came from weirdos and artists and outsiders doing shit their own way, not following rubrics. I want to see your Simon and Garfunkel patch next to your Sisters of Mercy patch. I want to see your outfit that doesn't quite match the pre-approved subgenre, but still feels like you. I want people to feel like they can participate without being perfect. If you feel drawn to a label, don't feel like you need permission from someone else to claim it. If you are drawn to the scene, come on in! No need to prove anything. Like, come explore, come enjoy the music, come, like, enjoy the art and the fashion and the history, and, like, learn as you go. There is no need to have everything perfect from the like, dude, I don't know I don't know anything about it. I've been in this subculture, like in different alternative subcultures for so long, and just been like June bugging and sampling from all of them, and they're all so beautiful and so much fun. Like, it's good. Like, you should do this stuff because you enjoy it, not because you're trying to prove that you're worthy of some label. And like, again, to be so clear and to reiterate, I am not saying that those kinds of videos or that method of sharing information isn't useful, or that like those people are dumb, or that they like, no. I think that it's really about how our society privileges one type of information as way more legitimate than another. And I don't want to discredit people's work because, like, it reminds me of my own weird personal issues with academia. Like, what the fuck, okay? The information those creators share is genuinely valuable and valid, and there's nothing wrong with having respect for the history or wanting to preserve it in a way that feels like correct or honoring or like very accurate. Like, I get where that impulse comes from. It can sometimes just be more practical to present things in a chronological timeline or to group ideas into generalized categories. Like, I understand that these approaches have utility. I have used them myself. Like, that is not the point. My critique is more about the way that that kind of knowledge is often seen as necessarily more legitimate, instead of being recognized as just one way of knowing, among many. A necessary way of knowing, but not the only one, not the end-all be-all requirement, not the one that you have to have complete mastery over before you even dare to step foot into the local goth club. When preserving the history becomes a tool to make others feel small or unworthy, while elevating the speaker as the ultimate authority, to mirror patriarchal ways of thinking. It shifts from loving the culture to controlling it. Instead of offering knowledge as a gesture of care, it becomes a gatekeeping tactic rooted in fear, not love. So what am I actually trying to say here? I'm not anti-education, and I'm not trying to gatekeep the gatekeepers. I'm just saying, let's make room for other kinds of knowledge too. It's the next day, and I wrote more stuff. I want to talk a little more about this Venn diagram that I made. If you look at it, you might notice something. The stuff on the left, formal history, taxonomy, codified knowledge, that's kind of what society treats as real knowledge. That mirrors what gets valued in academia: structure, documentation, linearity, and it gets treated as more important. Why? Because our culture, including the subculture, tends to validate what mirrors dominant ways of knowing, which are usually white, male, and academic. The stuff on the right, personal experience, emotion, embodiment, those kinds of knowledge are often dismissed. They're devalued, considered soft, silly, and irrelevant. And culturally, we tend to associate that stuff with femininity. And you'll notice that when someone, especially a young person, or a woman, or someone from any marginalized group, shares their goth knowledge in an intuitive or passionate or personal way, they're a lot less likely to get taken seriously. So I'm not saying that each knowledge system isn't valuable, or that like you just ignore the goth bands like that. Like, I'm not saying that stuff. I'm saying that everyone connecting to a subculture should be treated with dignity. The scene is richer when we respect emotion, instincts, and aesthetics as much as we respect scholarship and structure. One isn't more real than the other, and they're both necessary to support the subculture. We just don't treat them that way in dominant conversations, and I think that's something worth interrogating. Part of me is a little worried that some of the language I might have used may have come off as like me just trying to like sound smart and throw shit around. So I wanted to kind of like explain, clarify where I'm coming from, and sorry if I came off as anything before. Okay, so when I say that some of the education in the scene can feel patriarchal, I'm talking about that dynamic where someone positions themselves as an authority, correcting others in a way that's more about power than care. Instead of, hey, let me show you a cool part of this history, it's, I know better than you, and you're doing it wrong. And I don't think it's intentionally patronizing for some people. I think often the way education or correction happens in subcultures and just mirrors patriarchal dynamics, not because someone means to be oppressive, but because we've all just been seeped in those patterns. It's this idea that I know better than you because I've been here longer, or any new ways of doing things is necessarily deviant and disrespectful because it does not match the original. That kind of stance can start to feel a lot like how traditional authority works, like a parent scolding a child, instead of an elder sharing stories. And subcultures at their best aren't about control, they're about community, growth, and mutual curiosity. Teaching doesn't have to mean dominating. I think we are all well served when we use a more community-oriented approach to knowledge, where experience is shared out of love and respect for each other, not just to assert dominance. Real community education doesn't punish people for not knowing. It makes space for learning, for growth, for difference. It acknowledges that the scene is living and evolving, and that people don't need to earn their right to belong by perfectly replicating the past. When I talked about, in my last video, like knowing what you believe and why you believe it, sometimes I'm talking about these systems where you're like, why do I think that like the old way of doing things is necessarily the correct way? Like, what systems in my brain have like taught me that thing? And like a lot of that is, yeah, just the way that we're parented, the way that we're told that like the adults know better, this and that. And like, yes, sometimes they do, but like the patriarchal learning versus like the community oriented learning, that's like kind of what I'm trying to get at. I have been thinking about moral panic and goth anxieties. On the one hand, there's the do I count as a real goth anxiety? And then on the other hand, there's the nobody is a real goth anymore. There's like this constantly this question of authenticity and what counts as a real goth and like all like very much these questions, right? And I find these two perspectives really interesting, especially as someone who's been online in alternative spaces for years, and it just feels like we're having the same conversations on an endless loop. There's clearly a lot of fear and frustration and disappointment floating around in the subculture, especially about goth being commodified or misunderstood. And like, part of me sees that fear as valid. I get the concern that when something was once transgressive or niche or like maybe deeply personal, and now it starts to feel sanitized and hollowed out and sold back to us as like a watered down aesthetic. But here's the thing, that sadness, that frustration, it often curdles into a kind of a reactionary moral panic, at least from my perspective, and it ends up being directed not at the actual forces that are draining the life from the subculture, but at individual people. Instead of turning that anger towards capitalism, towards corporate exploitation, towards algorithms and advertisers, systems that are designed to flatten and monetize everything, we just end up blaming people. Usually young people, a lot of times marginalized people, a lot of times women, and a lot of times anyone who just like looks like maybe they don't get it the way that you get it, because you get it, like, you know, right? Like, it's very much this constant question that we have in the subculture. I've been thinking about that, right? And it's just the same old fucking story, just dressed up in eyeliner. The kids are ruining the subculture. That girl's just doing it for attention. No one cares about the music. And these are reactions to real changes that I do think are happening, but I think they're aimed at the wrong direction. They're treating people as the problems, when the people are just symptoms of a much deeper systemic issue. Maybe the rise of surface-level aesthetic-first content isn't because a new generation is just shallow and stupid, but because we live in an attention economy that monetarily rewards content that's fast and visual and low effort to consume, honestly. That's not a moral failing. It's a design feature, and it's being exploited by platforms that don't exist to help us. So like, I get being frustrated that the goths who go viral are the most commercial, the most corporate, the most brand-aligned ones. But that's not their fault. It's the fault of the systems that reward that visibility. The platforms, the marketing, the money. Don't get mad at big titty goth girls for being visible. Be mad at misogyny, be mad at the fact that femme-presenting bodies are constantly being policed and judged no matter the context. Be mad at the fact that people still aren't allowed to just exist in their bodies without being evaluated and questioned. Maybe that girl in the Killstar outfit isn't ruining goth. Maybe she's just trying to feel powerful in a world that sells attractiveness as empowerment and empowerment in prepackaged aesthetics. Maybe the real problem is that we're being sold back pieces of a culture that used to be community built. That's not on her. That's on capitalism. I see people blaming kids for wearing popular alt brands and bandwagoning, and that's why the brands declined in quality. But the problem isn't the popularity. It's the brands that chose to sell out, to cut corners, chase profits, and abandon sustainability or ethics for fast fashion and higher margins. And like, I get they're also working within the systems because they are made up of individuals, but like, shit, you know? I think that we're really being told, as usual, to direct our rage sideways, at each other, instead of upwards, where the actual power lies. And while we're fighting over who's allowed to wear a choker and who's really goth, the corporations are just making bank off of our culture. Platforms are encouraging monetization of every single corner of our lives, and we're being pulled further away from each other and the radical roots that made these spots matter in the first place. So, yeah, be angry. Be upset that things feel off. But don't just stop at that first flash of annoyance. Interrogate that feeling of anger and where it's coming from. Is it about protecting something you love? Or about controlling who gets to feel what you felt? Let's stop blaming kids for the decay of a subculture when the real problem is systems selling it off. Be critical, but be kind. The enemy is profit over people, not the people themselves. On the, youth and expert anxiety, I really don't want this to sound like I'm saying all these young kids are just regurgitating Wikipedia to sound legit. That's not, no. What I'm trying to say is that this widespread attitude, anxiety of constantly needing to guard oneself and the community against imposters, this need for purity, pressures folks to feel like they have to be experts immediately and in specific ways and in pre-approved ways. And I feel like that does a lot more damage to people's sense of self and community than we realize. It mirrors oppressive power structures, often subconsciously. There's not just one valid way to experience the goth subculture, and I'm really tired of people feeling like they don't belong just because they don't fit perfectly into every single stereotype or cliche. We need more space to value exploration, embodied knowledge, personal history, and intuition as also valid forms of understanding and engaging in the subculture alongside the more formalized understandings. I think that the anxiety of guarding the community against imposters would be better spent guarding the community against corporate interests, capitalist greed, and this sense of having to police purity of the community against any deviance. Okay, so while I personally have a lot of discomfort around asserting boundaries, and it is something that I need to work on, and I'm trying to, I want to be really clear about something. I don't want to be misinterpreted as saying that we need to ignore harm or coddle our oppressors, and I want to reiterate that I'm coming from a place of privilege. I know that the world feels overwhelming right now. There is so much injustice and so much suffering going on. It can feel really scary and rage-inducing, and those feelings are real and valid. But I worry that sometimes, especially online, our anger gets misdirected, specifically when it's aimed at individuals instead of the larger systems exploiting all of us. For instance, I've seen people mock Shein goths for liking ugly clothes or having bad taste. And to me, the real issue isn't liking ugly clothes or having bad taste. Those aren't things that anyone should be judged for. I'd rather see the energy directed at the systems causing the problem in the first place. Fast fashion giants exploiting labor, platforms rewarding shallow identity performance, and a culture that equates self-worth with consumption. Personally, I own some clothes from Shein because I thrifted them. Does that make me a Shein goth? Sure, I guess. But I don't really care because I bought them secondhand, so my money didn't go to supporting the brand. Directly. To me, the issue isn't the brand, it's the larger system behind it. You can't tell someone's politics or ethics or even music taste just by looking at them. That's why I wish we'd just take people at their word when they say, I like the subculture, or I have something to share. And to be clear, most of my audience is really kind and awesome about this. I don't want to sound like I'm lecturing you guys because I think you're, for the most part, just so many people get it and are so kind. I try to dedicate a lot of my channel to making DIY and thrifting and fashion feel fun, accessible, and inviting. And honestly, I'd rather see someone enter the scene with underdeveloped views and have the chance to grow than to be pushed out before they even begin. Like, if you've got a Shein goth in your life, instead of calling them an idiot, why not show them your favorite bands or share your DIY tips? Look through their wardrobe and talk about how to customize or upcycle pieces. Help them build something cooler with them, not against them. Or just ignore them if you don't want to be friends. But like, you know what I mean? I don't want to chase them off immediately and be like, you're awful and don't get to belong, because who's that gonna help? I'm not saying that we ignore harm. I'm saying I want to prioritize safety, growth, and accountability. I don't think shame builds community. Compassion does. And I get the frustration. Like, it sucks when someone throws on a mass-produced outfit, uses the goth label, and acts indifferent to the culture's roots and subcultural values. But to me, the real issue isn't them at the end of the day. It's the forces behind them. Corporate greed, political inaction, and algorithm-driven platforms that push buying over belonging. I'm not mad at people for doing what they need to feel okay. I'm mad at systems that convinced us the only way to express ourselves or connect to a subculture is by buying stuff. I'm mad that joy, identity, and self-expression have been repackaged as products. I don't want to blame individuals, especially ones in my own community, for navigating the same hellscape I am. People have complex, personal reasons for the choices they make. And I believe we're stronger when we come together and focus on what we can do in our own lives, because yes, the personal is political and hope is necessary for change, and support each other and organize in our communities, whatever that looks like for you. It's not like I don't get it. Sometimes mocking our oppressors feels like all we can do. That kind of release has its place. But when our activism starts and ends with online dunks and endless arguing, it starts to feel more like entertainment than change. I just don't want all that righteous anger to get stuck in a loop of alienation and echo chambers, instead of fueling something deeply productive or transformative. I want to focus my energy on the oppressed, not the oppressor. To me, it's not about ignoring anger, it's about how we choose to use it. As a content creator, it can sometimes feel disheartening to see how often the internet rewards negativity. Call-outs, takedowns, moral outrage. I get why it happens. The algorithm rewards it, and sometimes it's easier to get fired up about someone doing it wrong than to amplify something joyful or educational. And again, I'm not blaming individuals. This is a systemic issue. But we do have power in where we choose to place our energy. If even a fraction of the internet outrage was redirected into building, joining a mutual aid group, teaching friends how to DIY, unionizing in your workplace, or just making or uplifting art that might bring people together, like, I think it would make a real difference. The internet can feel bleak and hopeless sometimes, but we don't have to stay stuck in that. You can shape things. You can help others feel less alone. To me, that matters more than dunking on someone for not knowing everything yet. We have more power than we think, and it's worth using that power to make things better. Speaking for myself, when we spend hours obsessing over Shein goths or rage-bait TikTokers like Trump goths, we give those things more power. Hate views are still views, engagement is engagement. I'd rather use my energy to uplift marginalized voices, share resources, or just try to make something beautiful. I'm trying to break down these hierarchies and make space for folks to freely express themselves from a place of love. Like, honestly, to me, this subculture, it's supposed to be enjoyable. You don't have to be a walking encyclopedia to participate. You can deep dive into the music and history, or you can just love dressing up, or dancing, or wandering graveyards, or listening to spooky tunes, or crafting, or whatever. As long as you're not hurting anyone, I'm happy you're here. That's the kind of community I want. One where curiosity is encouraged, where joy isn't gatekept, and where learning is a process, not a prerequisite. And to be clear, as much as I might have snarked, I do love that folks out there are passionate about history and educating others in a clear and concise way. It is important too. I should probably say, a lot of this is probably my own sensitivity talking. But is it just me, or do some folks online act like liking goth music is super hard and unusual and like some kind of badge of honor? Like, yes, I also like the music, but it's not that hard to enjoy something, A, with such a variety, and B, that was made for the sole pleasure of artistic expression. Like, I am a person in a room with headphones on. It's fun, but I don't find it terribly revolutionary. I make DIY content and I'll get comments like, goth is about the music. And it's like, yeah, why are you assuming I don't know that? Why is it so hard to imagine that someone could love the music and enjoy fashion or crafting or expressing themselves visually? I don't start every video with goth is a music-based subculture, because we know it's been said a million times and I'm tired of the script, especially when I get talked down to for being bubbly or not trad or focusing my content on the fashion and thrifting and whatever instead of the music. It's weird. I want to be transparent and honest about this and like speak for myself, and I might just be too sensitive, but sometimes the online attitude in the subculture has personally made me feel like I've gotten a bit like weird and bitter and like defensive around my love for the music, just because I'm so freaking tired of people assuming that I don't know what I'm talking about or that I couldn't possibly like the bands that I do. It just makes me want to throw my hands up and be like, yep, you're right, I have no clue who anyone is. It's freaking just frustrating. And I think it's probably something that has happened cyclically and constantly, and honestly in a lot of niche spaces. It's this generational tension, this idea that like, back in my day, the goths were real and authentic and earned their place because they had to dig through the record stores and swap bootlegs in parking lots. Meanwhile, people like me, who discovered the subculture or bands through like blogs or YouTube or like more accessible ways, were seen as like lazy or fake or like less devoted. And honestly, that mindset feels exhausting. I don't mean to deny the role of music in the subculture. I love the music, I listen to it, I connect with it, and it's deeply meaningful to me. But I'm also a visual, hands-on creator. My passion is in DIY, fashion, and making stuff. That's how I show my love for goth, and it doesn't erase my interest in the music. I am not mad that people before me had to work harder. I respect and want to honor that. Their devotion, their passion, their work. It paved the groundwork for so many of us to find this music and subculture today. But I really want to push back on the idea that just because the path is easier now, it means that the connection is weaker. Accessibility shouldn't be a threat to the subculture. It's a gift. It means that more people can find something beautiful without needing to suffer or earn it. And frankly, the idea that struggle is the only marker of sincerity feels maybe like a bit of a projection of bitterness and not necessarily community care. Saying we had it harder should be a way to express pride, not a weapon to belittle younger folks and create hierarchies of who counts and who gets excluded. I also think it's worth pointing out that people often mistake tone for depth. Personally, just because I'm bubbly or I decorate with dolls and pastels and bats and focus on DIY instead of just like making endless educational content and super precise playlists, doesn't make me shallow or stupid. It just means I'm expressing love for the subculture in my way. And sometimes I feel like I should perhaps change my expression to be taken more seriously. And it's painful to be talked to like you're ditzy and irrational just because you're passionate. I hate the idea that you have to be dour to be taken seriously. I like my pastel decor. I don't want to feel like maybe if I redecorated my room with Cure posters, then people would take me seriously. Like, I shouldn't have to change anything to prove anything. I get that some people are nostalgic or feel alienated by newer expressions of the subculture, but I really don't think gatekeeping is the solution, because it just pushes people out. And most of the people being pushed out, they're often marginalized, young, neurodivergent, queer, femme, people of color, disabled, poor, or just excited in a way that feels too much for some of the jaded crowd. But I think the passion is beautiful. I think joy belongs here too. Okay, I'm really worried about offending folks with this one, but I want to talk about it because it's a feeling that I feel, but then I feel guilty for feeling it, and like, I'm anxious about how I might come off, but I feel like it's important to finally maybe share and be clear. I completely understand the frustration of when people label music that doesn't really fall under the goth umbrella with the goth label. I have a weird dislike for pop punk that I mostly try to keep to myself. But sometimes when like someone sticks MCR like Fall Out Boy in a goth hits playlist, part of me definitely just like wants to roll my eyes and be like, oh, wow, like so goth. And I'll be honest, like it's partly about genre accuracy, but mostly it's just because pop punk isn't really for me. And when people assume it is, it can feel a little like, you don't get me at all. But here's the thing. Just because I personally don't vibe with it doesn't mean it's wrong for someone else to enjoy it and to want to be a part of the community. There's a lot of music that I like that other people hate or find annoying. Like, I'm thinking of ska, I'm thinking of folk punk, and I'm thinking of musicals. A lot of people hate that stuff. And that's okay. We all have our preferences, and it's fine to be into multiple things. And part of it's ironic because like I have liked bands in the past that would definitely fall under that umbrella. Like oh my gosh, Front Bottoms. I have like a patch on my high school pants that's like like people would totally call that pop punk. Like I get it. But I've been asking myself like, who does my snobby attitude in this case actually help? Because I remember being that younger person just starting to discover subcultures, trying to find something that felt like me, even if I didn't have the full vocabulary or the full history yet. And I would so much rather someone find joy and start exploring goth through a slightly off playlist or a misunderstood band that they also love and are allowed to love, then get immediately shut down and be like, you're not a real goth, you'll never understand this. I personally don't want to prioritize purity or accuracy over being open and curious and just trying to meet people where they're at. I think it's important for us to remember that subcultures are personal. I sometimes get a little sting when someone assumes I love a popular music thing. Like, people will ask if I like Chappelle Roan, and part of me will be like, I don't really like modern pop. But then I have to stop and think, why am I reacting like this? Like, it's not the end of the world if someone assumes I'm into something I'm not. And, like, my idea of pop being, like, a bad thing is tied up with, like, a lot of misogyny and, like, ideas of, like, things that women like not being, like, taken serious. Like, it's a lot of cultural conditioning type stuff, you know? And it's not the end of the world if someone assumes I'm into something that I'm not. They're sharing what resonates with them, and I should be happy about the fact that they like something, even if it's not my exact taste. Instead of being like, I don't like pop, I'll try to tell myself to say, you know, I'm not super familiar, but what do you love about her? Because that might open up a conversation, and then maybe I can sneak in a little, well, that's fun. I've been really into London After Midnight and Paralyzed Age lately. Do you want a recommendation of some songs I like? That kind of exchange feels way more fun and community-oriented than shutting someone down just because they assumed something about me. There's so many people online already being a dick and overly rude about new people in the subculture that I just never want to add to that. And I'll be real, like, there's also a pretty real sting when I feel like sometimes people assume that I don't know the music, or they assume that it couldn't mean something to me or a lot to me. Or when I get lumped in with people whose tastes are totally different, it hits like a little pride wound. But I try to remember that the point for me isn't to prove how legit I am. The point is to share what I love and connect with people. I don't think you can build a community by standing at the gate with a buzzer being like, wrong. So as much as I feel the frustration, I don't want to spend my limited and beautiful life on this planet telling strangers, that band actually doesn't count as goth. Like, yes, goth is about the music, but it's also about how we talk to each other and how we help each other discover and grow. I think that matters just as much. So, if you relate, if you love the subculture, but sometimes feel anxious about being misunderstood,
I wanted to end with a little affirmation.
Before I go, I just want to speak directly to anyone who's ever felt the sting of being called a poser, or who worries about not being goth enough. If you've ever felt like you're on the outside of something that you love, I want you to know you're not alone. That pain is real. It's not silly, and I know how much it can hurt. I've been there too. That ache of wanting to belong to something dark and beautiful and creative and alive, something that finally feels like home, and then being told you don't fit into it, it's heartbreaking, especially when so many of us found alternative subcultures after feeling like outsiders in other parts of our lives. This is supposed to be the place we can just be. So, here's the truth. No one else gets to define your identity or your love of a subculture for you. Not some internet commenter, not a bitter gatekeeper, not an unkind classmate or parent or sibling who didn't get it, not even your own self-doubt. You know what you love. You know why you're here. It's not pretend. It's not fake. It's real. Subcultures aren't exams you have to pass. They're messy, evolving, human spaces built by people like you who cared enough to show up. You don't have to know everything to be a part of something. You don't have to perform your knowledge to deserve your place. There's room to grow, to learn, to show up as yourself, as you are, exactly as you are today. You're allowed to take part in what you love. You're allowed to start or restart or change whenever you want. You don't need to prove your knowledge to strangers or earn your belonging. If someone makes you feel like you do, that's not your fault. It's on them. I promise you're not doing it wrong if you're doing it from a place of joy. The point of all of this, music, fashion, community of all kinds, is to feel something, to find connection, to enjoy it. Not to create some anxiety-inducing mini-police state. I promise that with time, it gets easier to brush off mean comments. They might still sting a little, but they eventually lose their power. And you do belong here. If this speaks to you, if you find joy, connection, or expression here, this is yours too. Keep learning, keep loving, keep showing up. The people who matter will see you. And most importantly, you get to see yourself as valid right now, not someday after you've quote-unquote earned it. Goth isn't a purity test. You don't have to pick a label if you don't want one, but if you're too scared to claim the label because you're worried you don't deserve it or whatever, I hereby grant you permission. Just please know you never actually needed any. And if no one has told you today, you're doing great. You're already a part of this, and I'm glad you're here.
See that moon